This week we're going to discuss Little and Callahan's views on abortion. Margaret Little starts us off saying that because the extreme intimacy and long-term impacts of pregnancy, that abortions are always permissible, though she claims some may be indecent. Some points that I like that she points out, or some effective points she has, I think. She talks about the impacts and risks associated with pregnancy that people often forget and that often go overlooked. Medical risks such as sickness, preeclampsia, pregnancy-induced psychosis. Social impacts such as women are more likely to become victims if they're pregnant, to stay in bad relationships, and to be outcast by their family members. Personal impacts of pregnancy such as shift in priorities, shift in personality, changes in identity. She says these all come together to make it so that a woman has no moral obligation to put themselves through pregnancy. She uses two analogies such as a person doesn't have an obligation to marry another person just because it would make a lot of people happy, and that a person doesn't have an obligation to jump on a grenade to save other humans, even though it would obviously be a heroic thing and it would make a lot of people happy. That we're not, as humans, under any obligation to do those, to act those ways. She talks about how arguments that I don't like as much. She talks about how irresponsible sexual activity should not obligate a person to maintain gestation of a UDH just because they make a mistake. To me, it's personally, I think it's a slippery slope we go down where we say that you can engage in risky behavior, yet you can avoid the consequences. Much as the point she pointed out of how the risk associated with pregnancy and the impacts of a pregnant woman, I think we should point those things out, but we should take that into effect and say, hey, maybe we shouldn't be engaging in risky sexual behavior if we're not ready to have children. I think those are things that we could look at and do a little better. And I think that her points are valid, but instead of saying, hey, we shouldn't have pregnancies, we should be able to terminate pregnancies, maybe we should say, hey, we should think about sexual activity a little bit more and make sure it's something that we want to engage in. Sydney Callahan looks at abortion through the maternalistic thinking or the feminist care ethics point of view. She says that it's inconsistent with the nurturing behavior of females, that protection of the weak is something that that females look to, and that it gives unequal power to one person over another. She points out that a point that I really like is that she uses Rawls' veil of ignorance, saying that if you were in UDH, you would want laws in place to protect yourself so that you could have an opportunity to live a life. Another good point is that women were once considered the property of men, and that abortion treats UDHs the same way that men once treated women and made them property. And similarly, she makes a good point in saying that human life is intrinsically valuable, and that a UDH does have rights regardless of how a person in power thinks about or treats those people under them. So, for instance, men could not change the argument that women had value or that women had rights. Therefore, a woman can't change the UDH's value or says that a UDH doesn't have certain rights. Arguments I didn't like as much. Callahan argues that a woman has a responsibility to carry a UDH regardless of any circumstances, and she specifically states that if a woman has been raped, that she has a responsibility to carry that UDH. I can't agree with this at all. I can't get on board with this. It just goes against everything. I don't know that I have an argument for it. It goes against my just inner beliefs. To tell a woman who has been the victim of sexual assault, who's been raped, that she has to carry her attacker's child. I think that just takes it a little far. She also goes about talking about monogamy and how rampant sexual activity has caused like fleeting sexual relationships, pornography, STDs. And on a personal level, I can agree with this. I can support this argument personally. I think she has some arguments to be made, but I also don't think that you can. Those are also lifestyle choices, and I don't know that's something that we can choose for other people. All things considered, they're pretty good arguments on both sides. Personally, I prefer Callahan's argument for my personal self, just because I don't favor overarching policies as much. I think I really identify with Rawls' veil of ignorance, and I think that that's a good starting place for most discussions and most arguments. Callahan uses it. The things I wouldn't do is I really think the veil of ignorance could possibly say that, would possibly allow abortions in the cases of someone being raped or high probability of a mother dying during pregnancy. And that's a good place to start.